Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Shake It Up, the podcast. I am extremely pleased to bring I'm going to call him a young man, but he's not that much younger than me, but he is a little bit younger, to the podcast to talk about his experience with DBS surgery. And the fascinating thing is that Marcus, who is my guest, has had it, well, today's Monday, and you had it last Thursday, correct? So
Correct. Yeah.
he will be joining us. He's going to tell of his experience. And one of the things that I'm planning to do here is have little bits, and we're going to talk every once a week, twice a week, every 2 weeks, and of his recovery. And the reason we're going to do that is obvious. It's brain surgery. And number two is because Marcus had a different surgery than I had. There are three flavors of deep brain stimulation surgery, DBS surgery. And I had the one where they do everything at once. And I had kind of a little bit of a struggle, a little malaise for a couple of weeks. Now, I don't know if that's typical of everybody or just me or of this surgery, but I have nothing to compare it to. Marcus, on the other hand, had the deluxe model where they're doing one electrode, waiting 2 weeks, doing the second electrode, waiting 2 weeks, and then they're going to implant the pacemaker-like gizmo that makes it all work. So with that, welcome, Marcus.
Oh, no, thank you, Steve. And thank you, those, who don't know, I've spoken to Steve here in the previous weeks and listened to his podcasts and, want to say thanks for, the information you provide. It's helpful. It was helpful for me going into this. And the conversations were helpful. In addition to Steve, just to give some background, I did talk to another gentleman, and I live in the Columbus area for, I guess, starting there.
Go
And I'm
Bucks.
having go Bucks. I've had the procedure done at Ohio State, or the first of the procedures done at Ohio State, and I'll share my contact information with Steve if you have any questions I don't cover. That said, as Steve said, I'm 4 days, 5 days out on having the first surgery. As he said, I'm taking the track where I'm going to do three surgeries. They've implanted the first of the nodes or the electrodes on Thursday. They're going to implant the second group a week from this Thursday, so it'd be 2 weeks from the initial surgery. And then 2 weeks from there, they're going to implant the device, the pacemaker device or the battery, and on the right side of my chest. All that said, you should ask if you're not given the choice. I asked through a series of questions and found that there were two choices. And I'm glad I did, and I would encourage people to ask as well. Again, the burr hole is about the size of a nickel. The pilot hole is about a third of the size of the burr hole. And so that's the first thing. What are the differences? The burr hole, they have more stability when they insert the device. There's more room for them to navigate the placement. When they do the pilot hole, they were still comfortable with it, and they were good with the placement and such. But they were just quick to point out that if things are difficult placing it, they wouldn't have as many options. I chose the pilot hole, for right or wrong. The surgeon I worked with, expressed comfort doing the pilot hole, said he had done a number of them before. We talked through his comfort level with the pilot hole versus the burr hole. And, again, it was a decision I made the morning of the surgery. We talked about it in the weeks leading up to the surgery. But again, I would strongly urge the listeners to look into that piece. What he told me was there are some surgeons who only do the burr hole. He also said there are some surgeons that only do the pilot hole. Now, he said he offered a choice of the two, and I chose, again, the pilot hole. But I want to be quick to point out, they're not both for everybody. There are benefits to the burr hole. There are benefits to the pilot hole. And there are cons to the burr hole and there are cons to the pilot hole. And so, I just, again, would encourage everybody to do their research and think objectively and, try to work with somebody else so you take the emotion out of the decision. But that was the first thing, I wanted to talk about on this call that I found during the first surgery that was very important. The second thing I was a little surprised by, and I'm reluctant to use the word surprise, but just, when I came out of the anesthesia, there's a bit of a speed bump on my head where the wire goes. The nurse was quick to point out in post-op and that night that it's something that recedes over time. And Steve, I guess I'll turn it over to you for a moment, but you just talking what we talked about, what that is for you 8 months later.
Yeah, you have to, if you visualize the two electrodes going to a certain part of the brain, they connect up here, and then the wires, the leads literally meet back here. And the reason they do that is that they've got a tougher wire that goes down, and that's where when they implant this here, they've got to connect everything. It's not wireless. This doesn't bother me. I can feel it if I go for it. These I can feel, obviously. They don't look as bad as they feel to me, because you've got this lump, these continuous lumps on your head. But women should be no problem at all. Men, I mean, let's face it, I'm going bald. Sooner or later they're going to be there. So I'm thinking of dressing them up for holidays. Put lights on them for Christmas, that type of thing.
Yeah, I don't have, going back to it, that's a good segue, Steve. I don't have the bumps that Steve has as part of doing the pilot hole, but I do have what again I call a speed bump. Like I can feel as I talk here, there's like a little bit of a bump where that wire runs. And that's a little different, and that's what Steve was talking about there, that I suspect, and you can ask me on the next podcast, but when they go to unravel it and bring it down into my neck and into my chest, that wire I feel now will recede, and that's what the nurse had said in the room the night of the surgery was, you'll feel it the night of the surgery, but it goes down over time. And
Well, it dawned on me that you may not have the connecting, that may be just the connecting wire. You may not have the extension.
I may not. That's true.
That goes down into your chest.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's run. All I know is that when they put this in, when they put the whole lead, all the leads in and stuff, they want you deep under, because they're literally just ripping through tissue in order to get the thing where they want subcutaneously.
And that's part of this podcast is I'm learning as I'm talking to Steve, and I'll tell people, full disclosure. Again, I just want to emphasize I'm 4 days out from the surgery. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, so that was one surprise, was that wire and the speed bump on my head. The other, when I did the pilot hole, and this is where Steve and I had a different procedure, I now have a 4-inch incision or a 5-inch incision across my head here. Steve talked about, his was only, again, a burr hole about the size of a nickel, a semicircle.
Yeah, and two little semicircles.
Yeah.
And I have no idea the difference. And that obviously is something you plan on asking your surgeon, I'm sure. And next time I go in, it will be a question on my mind, because this whole burr hole versus pilot hole surgery thing, it's all news to me. And that's one reason I'm doing the podcast, is get as much information out there as I can.
The incision was a bit of a, again, I hate to use the word surprise, but it was a bit of a surprise because I had talked to Steve and I talked to other people, and I was expecting something the size of a nickel. But again, I think it's tied to the different procedures. And when I do this podcast in 2 weeks, I'll talk through the answers the surgeon gave. I posed them in an email to him. And, again, I'll share all that as I get it. The other thing I want to talk about is the recovery from the surgery. I'm 4 days out, 5 days out. I had the surgery Thursday morning. I will say I had minimal pain coming out of the surgery. I really have just taken Tylenol since I was discharged from the hospital. I was able to drive Saturday morning. Um, I would have been able to drive Friday night, but there's a 24-hour restriction from the last time I took a pain pill. So I wasn't able to drive Friday night, but I did drive. I was able to drive Saturday morning. It was comfortable. I can do a pretty full range of stuff. I'm back to work. It's Monday morning. I went back to work today. Worked a full day of work. Um, I don't have much fatigue. I don't have much, Steve, and I'll let him talk in a moment, had talked about having a malaise. I'm not experiencing that. What I would say I do have though is there is a numbing sensation they applied to my head for the surgery, and that's gradually, going away. I'm able to feel more of my head since Steve and I talked Saturday. I'm now Monday able to feel more, and it's not painful. It's not terribly uncomfortable. It just feels different, is what I
Yeah.
would say. It feels like I'm wearing a hat continuously. And even that's changing day by day. So if I have this podcast in 2 weeks, I'll share what it felt like a week later. But I've talked to other nurses and such, and they've said that's pretty normal with a brain or a head surgery. Is they use a very strong sedative that takes a while to wear off. So I can tell you the staples that I have in my incision. I don't really feel those 4 days out either. If I touch the incision or whatnot, I can feel it, and there's some pain, there's some discomfort, but it's not excruciating. It's not terrible. Um, and so I would say, going into the surgery, I would not be apprehensive. I would not stress out about it. I understand that's easy to say to somebody going into the surgery. It is brain surgery. It is a very big deal. But going through the procedure, it took about 2 hours. They woke me up halfway through it, did some cognitive tests to see, make sure I was alert and everything. They fired up the transmitter, hooked it up to a battery, and they were able to see the tremor had gone. Um, and then they knocked me out. Yeah, exactly. No, his thumbs up is great. But I don't remember it, or much of it other than the test they gave. And the procedure itself did not take long. The overnight stay in the hospital was more cumbersome for me, just having to
Yeah.
stay in the bed for a night. And
You
you
said the
know
procedure was what, about 90 minutes?
yeah, it was, I don't know for sure, but talking to my wife who was in the waiting room, to anywhere from 90 minutes to 2.5 hours. They came out and talked to her when it was done, and she knew more about it than I did when
Oh, yeah.
she came to talk to me. And so yeah, then you just stay the night in the hospital. And it's, you're in an alarmed bed because you're in the brain. I assume people watching this will be in the brain unit. They don't want people who've had brain surgery wandering the halls. They don't know what effects the surgery is gonna have and such. So they watch a pretty close eye on you, which is good. I would expect that. And again, they come in your room every 2 hours and give you a cognitive test to make sure you know where you are, the date and such.
I'd
And
forgotten about that until you brought it up. But
it,
yeah, they would come in, you are who? What
yeah,
day is
yeah.
this? What bus do you take? That type of thing.
Yeah, and no, I mean it's the right thing, and I would tell people, watching this, think about it from in the bigger picture. You've just had brain surgery. You want to make sure, you may seem to feel okay. Plenty of people with concussions can still, do what they did before, but it's still a very traumatic event, and so, I guess in a weird way, it was irritating that I had to stay the night, but it was, somewhat peaceful to know that, people were making sure I was good, and everything was working as it should. One other thing I'd say, and
Sure.
this was interesting in the recovery, when I was talking to the surgeon before I had it, the restrictions that were placed on me, and they will be placed on people watching this, they weren't around the incision. I thought, I have a 5 to 10 pound weight maximum that I can pick up, and
Right.
which is understandable. You've had surgery. But what I thought was interesting was that restriction is not based on tearing the incision open. It's based around, you have a lot of blood vessels and whatnot that have been disturbed in the surgery. And they don't want you doing an increased activity that comes with lifting a heavier weight. And so they want to make sure everything in your head heals properly, before you go up in weight and what you can pick up and such. So one thing I would tell people, that's something I assumed from having other surgeries, is, there's a weight restriction that can tear stitches or tear the incision. But in this case, be careful. It's not necessarily tied to the incision. It's tied to the increased blood flow or the increased activity that comes with lifting a heavier weight. And then, it can make healing up around here a little bit more difficult. So,
well, and you bring up a point, and it's well known that the brain has no nerve endings. It doesn't hurt until you get a headache, and then you'd swear it did. But it does have a blood supply.
Yeah.
So the implantation of the electrodes is disrupting. There is some tearing of tissue in there.
Yeah.
And even though they go through what my surgeon called the low rent part of the brain, and I said, "Oh, you mean all of mine?" And he said, "No, he said the prefrontal cortex."
Mine was generous and not to bring that up, but we didn't. We didn't talk much about that other than to say, just, be careful in your exertion and give it a couple days. And so, I'm, doing things, but I'm not, exerting myself any more than I should. And so, well, I'll talk about it more in the next podcast where that ends up, but the short is just, be conscious of the recovery. It's a long road. It's not meant to just end in 2 days.
I have 2 questions for you.
Yeah.
Number one, I'd like you to touch on what you went through leading up to the surgery. Did they run you through a battery of cognitive tests as they did me?
Going back 6 months, I did go through that.
Okay.
About 6 months ago, back when they were determining if I was eligible for the DBS surgery, they had me run through some memory stuff. Now that's been a while, but in the recent weeks there hasn't been much. That was before they even made this.
Once you've been accepted, you've been accepted. Yeah. And I should point out to the audience that not everybody is a candidate for this. It's I'm not going to say it's hit or miss, but it's and it's not age related necessarily. They do DBS surgery in people who are in their 80s.
Yeah.
It's all dependent on quality of life, cognitive ability, and things like that. So if you think you're a candidate, don't be afraid to ask. The worst that can happen is they say no, we can't do it. But I think I mentioned this to Marcus on the phone before his surgery, was that my big thing was that the only thing that scared me more than having this surgery was not having this surgery. And the more I thought about that, it gave me something to latch on to. That did I really want to go through the next 20-25 years of my life with hands that wouldn't do what I wanted them to do? And I think Marcus is facing that same thing, but at a much younger age.
Yeah, it's different. I guess just switching gears and talking about the actual, I still have the tremor as I sit here. My device is not on or is not activated. I've been told, when the device was activated in the operating room, the tremors did go away. So, taking that, um, for me, I'm still yet relatively young. I'm still working. And so for me, the tremors have gotten difficult around that.
Yeah.
And so, I'm thinking as well about the long term and having this,
Right.
remedied or whatnot.
Well,
So
and
I could,
I plan on working for another 4 or 5 years.
do you know you have the device? Yes. I mean, there's physical characteristics that you can feel the device. Gonna take some time to get used to. Sure, yeah, I'm sure it will. But there's nothing that makes you, completely put off or turned off by the procedure. So I would say, and again, the recovery is relatively smooth.
Before we're kind of running out of time here, but before I pull the plug, I'm curious, have they told you how long it will be after implantation of the device itself that they will be able to turn it on? Is it another 2 weeks?
Yeah. So and I'll talk about this more in the next one, but as I understand, it's a series of 2-week procedures. So I have had the first one. 2 weeks later, it's gonna be the second electrode in my head. And then 2 weeks after that is going to be the battery. And then 2 weeks after that will be the programming. So it's roughly, doing the math, it's just in every 2 weeks, I'm having a different step done.
Okay.
And so yeah, it's a process. I'm working through it. Did I have some apprehension? Sure. I'll be honest with people watching it. My tremors are bad, but they're not debilitating, but they were going to
Right.
become debilitating. And so for me, it's knowing that this is going to, move me to a better place sooner than later, whereas some people are already in a bad place when they have it. And so
Yeah. Yeah. I
so
would
so I
totally
would
agree
say,
with that.
yeah, and it's different for everybody. Like we said, not everybody's a candidate. Um, but if you are a candidate, then I would say have trust or faith in the people doing it, and you should probably, if not get this done, then maybe look at a few other things. But if you're to the point where you can't do certain things, it's only going to get worse. And I don't say this as a PSA announcement. I say this as it's everybody's choice. Everybody has an individual way of looking at it.
Right.
And brain surgery it's a very serious
You
thing.
have any final thoughts going into the second surgery? Are you excited about it now that you've gotten through the first one and you live to tell about it? So are you more enthusiastic about it now?
No, I wish I could say that. I'm not. And I feel bad saying, but I don't have much emotion in this. I say all that about the tremor and the debilitating piece and everything. But myself personally, I think the excitement will come for me later, when I can start to do things
When you
again
turn
that
the
I wasn't
switch?
able to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can save that for another podcast. There are certain things, and people watching this will know what I mean, who have it, is you stop doing some things and you forget about not doing those things.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
and so there are a lot of small things that I've stopped doing. And as I sit here, I couldn't tell you what those things are, but I
Well, they'll come
think,
back to you. But
yeah,
as soon as you find yourself able to do something, I was on a ladder working overhead yesterday. I was holding a drill bit with an extension this long, this long. I couldn't do that a year ago.
yeah.
I mean,
You
my
get a
hand would have
drill.
been like
Yeah,
this all over
yeah,
the place,
yeah,
and I'm just zip, 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 zip. And my wife goes, "Wow."
yeah.
So, you know,
Those are the small things. I mean, that I've gotten away from, and or that take me longer to do. So
right.
so to answer your question, I do. My excitement is more the long term. For me, um, I just have so much in my everyday that I kind of just try to forget about it, and I'll have the procedure, and as I get closer to the procedure, I'll think about it more. But again, that's why I'm doing this video. Hopefully it's rewarding for some people. Okay, but I'll share my contact with Steve, and if people have
Appreciate
questions,
that.
they can reach out to me.
One thing I'm going to leave you with, Marcus, you've got an assignment. Next time we talk, I want it, because one of the problems with essential tremor is it's not just the person afflicted, it's the family members. I mean, nothing bugged me more, and I'll be real quick about this, than having somebody offer to cut my meat for me. It's like, I'm not two, but I'm, that's an irrational thought. The dogs are hungry. Can you hear them? But that's an irrational thought. An irrational side, you're thinking, I'm being a jerk, for having those thoughts. So I want to talk about your wife. You indicated you're married, and her take on this whole thing now.
Get
Good
there
for you.
And I'll share that I have some friends. I have a friend that Essential Tremor runs in his family, and his dad has it, and we've talked about it, and he is young, but he's developing it, and it's challenging. And so, part of this is to tell people that there is, something you can
There's
do.
hope. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm cautious, I don't mean to sound like this is, a miracle drug or a cure by any stretch, but I think, I'll talk about it after I've had the procedures, but yeah, it's an option, and the process to get that option isn't a terrible process. It is brain surgery, but it's not terrible.
Well, we're running out of time. So what I want to do is tell everybody out there. I think what I'm going to wind up doing is putting up a podcast of each one of our meetings with Marcus here. And then what I'll probably do when we're all done, and Marcus is feeling better, is condense them into a single video and podcast that people can listen to, just to get a flavor of week 1, week 3, week 5, and so on and so forth. So thank you for joining us. Marcus was very gracious. I should mention, because I've got less than a minute before I get cut off by Zoom, is that we met through the manufacturer of the device that goes here in the electrodes, called Medtronic. And the only thing I want you to know about Medtronic, because they've got competitors out there, but it's the only one that if you have to have an MRI, it has what's called an MRI mode. So they can still do the MRI without having to remove it or make some special arrangements. So thank you for joining us. Marcus, thank you.
No problem. Take care, Steve.